Have you ever followed all the correct writing advice and still struggled to make progress? What if the problem isn't your writing ability, but the writing process you've been told to use? Hey, co-authors. Most writing advice assumes that writers can sustain attention, manage time consistently, and move through projects in a predictable, linear fashion. But for people with ADHD, that's often not how their brain works. In this episode, we'll explore why conventional writing advice often fails ADHD writers and how to design a writing process around your brain that can unlock greater creativity and consistency. So let's dive in. Whenever people talk about their ADHD diagnoses around me, I kind of feel that old man energy of like, get off my lawn. Like I got diagnosed, whenever I was like in third grade. I think that my report card said something along the lines of, Kyle has found every way possible to not sit in a chair correctly. And yeah, man, like I remember going through school, not really having a good time. My public school was good. I had a lot of good teachers, a lot of good support, but it was the 90s. We didn't really know that much about ADHD. And as a result, a lot of the stigma that was around it was basically, well, you're taking medicine because you're not as smart as everyone else. And you lack discipline to like knuckle down and to make yourself better. So take these pills, shut up, and maybe you'll learn something and you'll make something of yourself. And so you kind of internalize that whenever you're a young person. And that sort of chains out to the rest of your life as you're going through your undergrad and your grad programs, because you know that you have this diagnosis. You don't really want to talk about it with other people because, again, there's still stigma around it, especially in grad school. And then all of a sudden, everyone's like, oh, we've destigmatized this. We'll just talk about our ADHD on podcasts and on TikTok and on YouTube. And now everyone is ADHD. And it's like, oh, okay, well, like this was a massive turn of events that I was not expecting. And so I get a little grumpy sometimes, but all that is to say, as someone who's been diagnosed with this since a young age, I've always kind of struggled with why does it seem like the practices and the institutions that are around me seem so easy for other people to navigate, and it comes so easily to them, and it's not coming easy to me. And I feel like I'm a smart person, and I feel like I've got a good head on my shoulders, and I've got good ideas, but I just can't seem to like focus them in a way that allows me to take those ideas and then make some sort of success out of them. What is it that's going on with other people? Of course, you read all the writing books, you read the study books, you read the how-to books, and most of them are not geared for people that are ADHD. Most of them will give you advice like, keep your nose to the grindstone, keep your head down, eat your peas and carrots, right? And you're like, well, yeah, those things are all true. You need to have grit, fortitude, responsibility, whatever the buzzword is nowadays for it. That's true. Like at some point in time, like you take ownership of yourself, you're captain of your own destiny, whatever. But at the same time, like there is definitely something to be said that the way that an ADHD person thinks is just not the same way. And so as I was thinking about doing this episode, I started looking at books that were written on this subject. One that really stood out to me was this one from a guy named Tom Hartman called Hunter in a Farmer's World. And I think one of the reasons that I like it is because it resonates with me insofar as it really sort of situates ADHD, probably even more than ADHD, although it's just that one sort of condition for this book. But one can think of neurodivergence less as a disability and more as a maladaptation from an evolutionary perspective. And that what you have is something that you are adapted to as an ADHD person, in which case Hartman's argument obviously is that you're adapted to being a good hunter, and that's not really how the world's structured. So it's about trying to figure out how do you live your life as a hunter in a farmer's world. Okay. So I took his book. I wanted to distill some of the things that he talks about in there in terms of writing advice and how that might help everyone, I think on some level, probably, but particularly people who are writing with ADHD. Okay. So let's dive in. Are you interested in mastering scholarly writing, developing productivity, and increasing impact, all while staying healthy? Then welcome to the Publishing Academic Research Podcast. My name is Dr. Kyle Ruddick, and I'm a full professor and writing coach who's dedicated to making sure you break through whatever is stopping you from reaching your scholarly goals. I meet so many scholars who have creative, innovative, and daring ideas, but can never seem to get those projects from proposals to print. I want you to get your work in the hands of people who will read it and appreciate it. So let's get into this week's big idea. So again, one of the things that I like about Hartman's book is that he makes this argument that ADHD is less of thinking about it as a disability, better to think about it as an adaptation that was useful at one point of time in our evolutionary history and is maladaptive to our present moment. So here's some examples that he gives that I think might resonate with a person who is struggling to write, who has ADHD. So first, ADHD folks typically have nonlinear attention spans. Now, what I want to point out a couple of things here. First, it is not true that people with ADHD just can't pay attention. That is a myth. That is what schools and parents and teachers and all sorts of people in authority come up with, because what they want is for a child of 8 to 12 years old to act and comport themselves like a mini adult and to be in control of themselves all the time. Well, that's impossible even for neurotypical children. You're a child, right? You should be allowed to be a child, full stop. Okay. But what is true is that we have nonlinear attention spans. So it spikes, it dips, it redirects, right? And if you think of this from an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. If you are overly focused on something, right? If you hyper focus to the extent that you can't see other things, then as a hunter, you might miss important things that are going on around you in a hunt. Like you might miss tracks from a deer, spoor from a predator that's running around, like a bear or a wildcat, right? Like you might miss weather changes. All of those things are going on. And so your body, as an ADHDer, you're kind of in tune to all those things, both consciously and unconsciously. And whenever you flit from one thing to the next, that is your evolutionary brain going, hey, pay attention to this. Hey, pay attention to that. Hey, look at this other thing. Because all of those are redirecting you towards an ultimate goal. Because if you can adapt those things well, and we'll talk about how, those help you get to an overall goal, which is to catch your prey. But even untrained, it allows you to have your attention on a lot of different things, all of which are feeding you clues as to your ability to hunt and your relative safety while you're doing that. The second thing that you might experience is a sensation called time blindness. So you go back and forth from exaggerated senses of urgency to exaggerated senses of boredom. And you might even try to manipulate this in yourself by having a writing project that you don't do until the day before it's due, but it's that deadline that sort of really focuses. And that's because your brain is adapted to what we now consider to be the thrill of the hunt. Whenever a hunter is hunting, everything is bent towards this idea of catching a prey. But whenever a hunter is back at the village, what does a hunter do? Nothing, because there's no hunt, right? So hunters are well adapted to the idea of going out and having a sense of urgency, coming back home, not having a sense of urgency. Take that in contradistinction to a farmer, right? Farmers, you go out there every day, and whether you feel good, feel bad, whatever, crops are growing or not, you're weeding or not, you're watering or not, right? But it's very incremental. There's no sense in urgency in like growing crops. You do it every day. That's not how an ADHD mind works. An ADHD mind goes back and forth. And again, because of that, you are more prone to try to manipulate in yourself by setting yourself deadlines, putting yourself into positions where deadlines are always looming, because that's the only thing that gets you to that sense of urgency to get things done. The third thing that might resonate with you is a lot of ADHD folks have working memory limits. So what this means is that it's oftentimes difficult to hold multiple ideas in your head at the same time. You read too much and then you feel overwhelmed with all the stuff that you've read, trying to parse through all of the arguments, trying to make sense of them all is really, really hard for you to do. And making complex arguments then can really feel overwhelming because you're trying to hold all of it in your head. And that's really, really hard. That's why ADHD people, at least in my experience, are very, very prone to writing through arguments as they are developing them. That is, they are writing to try to understand the arguments and make sense of those things, because it's incredibly difficult for us to keep them all in our heads and to juggle them all at the same time. And again, you can think about this from an evolutionary perspective. Hunting is not something that requires you to have complex ideas in your head for long term. At the most, you might have a very quick, complex decision to make in the moment of a hunt, going this way or that way, what's the wind doing, things like that. But for the most part, hunt, it is a task that is itself simple, even as it is something that is novel every time that you do it. So as a result, then your mind is less predisposed to having a whole bunch of things going on in your working memory all at the same time. So these three things are three characteristics of an ADHD brain, right? Again, nonlinear attention time blindness, and a limit to your working memory. And those three things articulate in different ways, but in particular form two problems that I oftentimes see writers who have ADHD encounter time and time again. Okay. So the first major problem is hyperfocus traps. So whenever you're writing, you might encounter a very difficult idea, a complex argument, something that's really daunting and really kind of tough to think through. And you sit there and you think to yourself, oh man, like that's going to require a lot of cognitive effort on my part to cut through that Gordian knot. You know what I should do instead? I should look at all my citations and make sure that those citations are correct. Do I have all my citations? Did I cite them properly? Are the periods all in the right place? Let me focus on this thing that is manageable and knowable and doable, because I don't want to have to deal with this larger problem. And again, that's a function of your limits on your working memory that creates this sort of nonlinear attention. You start to focus on something else. It's not that you just can't focus, it's that your focus is redirected to something else. And then that leads you to time blindness. You get into formatting your citations or chasing down all your citations. And the next thing you know, 2 hours has gone by. Well, that's a full day of writing for me. So I guess I did all my writing today. Well, no, you did. You didn't do hardly any writing. You spent a lot of time on your citations, though. Don't get me wrong. As an editor of a journal, it continues to bewilder me how bad people are at their citations. Like, it's literally the one thing that has a right answer within scholarship. Everything else is an argument. Everything else can kind of be debated. Citations can't. It either is or it is not correct, right? Whenever people don't get it right, it drives me up the wall. But all that being said, you've now spent all of your time in this hyper focus because what you're doing, what has a clear output and what feels manageable and knowable, because that's preferable to you trying to stretch your working memory and to get yourself to a place where you can work through all of those complex arguments. The second problem is that you see that motivation to write gets tied to your interest in the problem and not in the importance of what it is that you're doing. And what I mean by that is that part of this manifests itself in your motivation to do things being tied to urgency. So you put yourself in a position where you don't get things done unless a deadline is right around the corner. And there's a couple of problems with this. First, and most obviously, you don't do your best work whenever you're under the gun. You don't do your best work whenever you don't give yourself time to review, proofread, edit, all those different things. And so you're putting yourself in a position automatically that is going to be less beneficial. But Kyle, you whine plaintively, I do my best work whenever I'm under the gun. No, you don't. You get your work done whenever you're under the gun, but that's not your best work. That's the best work that you could produce under those circumstances. And those circumstances are not ideal. They're just not. And so your work is not as good as it could be. But second, and probably more importantly, because you're flitting from deadline to deadline, or maybe even blowing past them every once in a while, the next thing you know, you've got a blood pressure that's through the roof, hypertension, and a chronic pain in your neck from stress inflammation. All that is to say, you are ruining your mental and physical health by putting yourself in a position to always be put into situations of stress and anxiety. And so not only is it not good for your work, it's just not good for you. But it doesn't even have to be this type of urgency. I know that for me, whenever I very first started writing, a lot of my inspiration for writing came from me reading other people's work or experiencing something. And then that made me frustrated or angry. And I used that anger, I used that frustration as a weapon to cudgel myself into writing about that topic. I actually just published a chapter where it's about workshops on diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? DEI workshops. And the whole thing is like the different major pitfalls that DEI trainers fall into in the types of ways they talk about DEI. And the whole reason I wrote that chapter is because I went to this business conference on DEI and listened to the keynote speaker. And it was all I could do to not just like run up to the front of the auditorium, choke this guy out so that way he couldn't say the things that he was saying ever again, and just like take over the lecture and teach people actual good knowledge about DEI. I was so frustrated by the end of it that I was like, I just got to write about this. Well, I mean, cool. As Zach De La Roca from Rage Against the Machine might say, anger is a weapon, but again, that's not where you're going to be doing your best work. If you always have to whip yourself up into anger or frustration or any other type of negative emotion, that's not going to be good for your writing because you're going to miss things because you've got an axe to grind. Also, it's just going to be stressful for you. But even if you do it because of positive emotions, oh, I just love this television show so much, so I want to write a film criticism of it. Well, again, right? It's cool that you're doing something that you love. At the same time, that can lead you to not make analyses the way that you should because you're so enamored with the artifact that you're not doing a good job of analyzing the film. All that is to say that whenever, as ADHD people, whenever we get into a place when our motivation to do our jobs, to be researchers, to be scholars, isn't tied to the actual questions that are being asked in our field and working through the scholarship that helps us contribute to that, but instead it's us flitting from topic to topic because that's caught our eye and is the shiny thing that's in front of us right now, then we're not doing our best work, we're not serving ourselves, and we're not serving our discipline. So what are some solutions then that we can use to address these two problems as they manifest out of those evolutionary habits that characterize an ADHD person? First, it's important for you to build a writing environment that reduces environmental barriers to your writing. Because we're prone to this nonlinear attention, one thing that I oftentimes see in other folks and I see in myself is I will look over some student's shoulder and they'll have like 8 million tabs up. And you're like, okay, that is visually overstimulating and visually overwhelming. And as a result, even if you think that you are keeping track of it all, I can assure you that instead what is happening is that you're just feeling the feelings of having all of these different things hit your neural processors. And what you should be doing instead is trying to reduce as much as possible those types of visual cues. So making sure to minimize the amount of tabs that you have open. For myself, when I like writing in MS Word, but either way, what I like to do is I like to have one window up. I do my work on PCs, right? So I'll have one window up that is the program that I'm using to look something up real quick or whatever it might be. And then I'll have another window up that is the document that I'm using to write, whether that's a Google Doc or that's the Microsoft Word. And then I have Alt Tab that I can go back and forth. But I have two discrete things. I have one place where I'm writing things, one place where I'm looking up things. I try not to mix those two things up. I don't have a tab up for my Google Doc and tabs up for the things that I'm looking for all in the same window, because then my eyes never get a chance to have a break because I've always got multiple tabs up. Whereas if I have two windows up with two different purposes, now my eyes can have a break because whenever I'm on this page, I'm doing this. Whenever I'm on that page, I'm doing that. The second thing that I would say is it's important for you to use some type of tool to capture ideas that are intrusive. It's funny, whenever I talk to students or whenever I talk to clients, a lot of them are like, oh, I have this cool idea. Let me tell you about it. And I'm like, okay, great. And then as they're telling me the idea, they're like, okay, but I also, now that I'm talking about that, I'm going to tell you about this other idea, and that connects this other thing that I've been thinking of, and that helps me articulate this third idea. And you're like, okay, whoa, 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 whoa. All of those ideas are cool. That's great. But you can't work on 4 projects at once. And even if you could, I would advise against that, because if you're working on 4 projects at once, you probably don't have 4 different journals with 4 different audiences for those submissions. So you're going to end up having to double up on a journal. That's not good, because then you're not going to get good reviewers. Like, there's just a whole bunch of bad things that happen whenever you overproduce all at once. It's much, much better for you to work on 1, maybe 2 things at a time. So that way you can really see something through and into that next part of the pipeline before you go to the next thing. But that being said, your mind wants to redirect, right? It wants to go to those other places. So it's important for you to keep some sort of capture tool. What I like to do is whenever I have a window up and I'm writing on it, then I will have another window up, and that's where I will make notes to myself. Hey, this made me think about this. I should track this down. Or maybe I write something and I go back to edit it. I'm like, okay, I really like that writing. This piece that I've put it in is not a good home for that. So I'll just cut and paste that and put it into another document that becomes all those little tidbits. And then I'm like, okay, now whenever I go on to this next project, I've already got some of those arguments. I've already got some of that writing going on. So that way I don't feel like I've wasted the writing, and I don't feel like I've had to delete something out of my writing. Instead, I can tell myself, oh, I'm repurposing that for a different thing. The third thing that I would say is that it's important for you to write in short and predictable bursts rather than for you to try to have 10-hour writing marathons. I remember whenever I very first became a professor, I'd go to Panera, I'd sit there for 6, 8, 10 hours writing things. And what I found after about 5 or 6 years was that if I went to Panera and I wrote for 3 or 4 hours, I gave myself 3 or 4 hours to write, I produced pretty much the exact same amount of stuff. Because in the 8 hours that I was sitting there before, I was doing a whole bunch of other stuff in between because my brain can't sustain my attention span on one thing for that long. Well, that makes sense. I mean, no hunter goes out and hunts for 8 hours. Like, that's just not how you do things. I grew up in rural Oklahoma. And if you're going to go hunt deer, you get out there at like 5 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning. But by 8 or 9 in the morning, you're done. After about 4 hours, you're done because after about 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, all the deer, they're bedded down for the day. They're not really walking around anymore. Deer do all of their movement in the early part of the day and in the late part of the day. Not really a whole lot in between. That's a survival function for them. So likewise, for humans, you're not going to be out there from 6 in the morning until 6 in the evening hunting deer. There would be no point in doing that because that's not whenever you catch deer. So your mind, your brain is geared towards this more shorter time span, 2, 3, 4 hours. Now, what I will say is that whenever you're hunting, I don't go out there, plow the field a little bit, go out, try to hunt some deer, come back, water the field, go back out, hunt a little bit more, come back, spread some manure, right? Like, that's not how you do things, right? The same thing here. I would encourage you to not think I have classes that I teach from 8 in the morning until 12 in the afternoon. And then I've got this like 3-hour break. And then after that, I've got one more class. And then after that, I've got like a faculty department meeting. So that 3 hours I can use to get writing done. Probably not, right? You're changing gears from teaching my students, answering emails, going to a department meeting, generally being like a colleague. You know, you see someone in the hall, you got to talk to them. Okay, now I've got to be a colleague that's like not a jerk to be around. Like, you're wearing a lot of hats. The last thing that you can do very well is sit down and have sustained attention for a long period of time. So it's better for you to know these are the days that I have less cognitive complexity, less taxing on my working memory. So that way I can devote a good 2, 3, 4 hours to the hunt of finding good ideas and putting them on paper. The last thing I will say is that the good thing about hunting is that whenever you get done hunting, if you were successful, you have a kill. Like, you've got the deer, you got the rabbit, you got the bear, buffalo, whatever it is. Like, you've got this thing. It's a very tangible reward at the end of this. And as a result, you come back to your house, to your village, whatever it might be. And everyone's like, oh, hey, what a great hunter. Good job. You brought us meat. Like, there's a lot of dopamine that goes on with being a successful hunter. Similarly, whenever you're writing, it's important for you to make sure that you are triggering those dopamine anchors. So that way it sustains you throughout the process. So for me, that means I go to my happy place to write. Whenever I'm at Panera, I know I don't have to deal with anything else. I don't have to answer emails. I'm not going to have someone drop by my office with a problem. I know that I'm not going to have to do dishes or laundry or anything else. Whenever I'm at this place, this is my happy place. And the music that's on, like, it's soothing because I know that as soon as I hear Cake by the Ocean or Pink Pony Club or any of the other pop songs, it's not music that I normally listen to. So whenever I hear it, I'm like, oh, I must be in the happy place. I must be in the place where I get things done, where I can just really focus in on the ideas that are important to me. So that sustains me, right? Throughout the process, I know that I'm in this place that feels comfortable for me. And then whenever I get things done, whenever I finish a chapter, which, by the way, I did finish my chapter that I was whining about last week. But whenever I finish a chapter, whenever I finish a submission, whenever I do anything like that, I celebrate those things. I go out to eat, or I buy myself the 50% off sweet treat at Panera or whatever it might be. But it's important that I have something that anchors that dopamine that says, hey, you've done it. Congratulations. And now we're done. We're done writing for the day. We're done doing this for the day. Now you can go on and do other things. You can go home. You can hang out with your spouse and your dog. You can watch TV. You can play a video game. You can do anything that you want to because you've signaled to yourself, the hunt is over. You found what it is that you were trying to find, and now we're moving on to the next thing. So overall, what I would say is that if you get a chance, Hunting in a Farmer's World is a great book. And I hope that whether or not you've been diagnosed with ADHD, I hope that you found some of this advice helpful for you. Okay. So that's about going to wrap it up for me. I hope that you're having a good summer. One thing that I will say is that as we're entering into a new school year, if you'd like for me to maybe give a presentation at your Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, talk to your class, do a workshop or anything like that for folks in your department or at your university, or even just a class that you're teaching, reach out to me, let me know. I'm happy to do that kind of stuff. I know that a lot of the people that I work with as clients in my coaching may find themselves in departments or in universities where they might feel like they're the only person who has the types of questions that they do, that they're the only person that needs help, that they're the only person who struggles with their writing. But I can assure you that like everyone does. Like I said last week, I consider myself to be a pretty prolific writer. And even still, there are times where I'm just like, dude, no, I just don't want to write. So like we all go through it. It's always good to have some advice on that. And so if there's any way that I can be helpful for that, please let me know. I'd be happy to talk with you and see if there might be an opportunity for me to help out. Okay. So thank you so much. And I will see you in next week's episode. Hey, co-authors, what's stopping your best ideas from becoming your next big publication? Brilliant research shouldn't die in your drafts folder. Now's the time to bridge the gap between the possible and the published. You can support this podcast by subscribing to it, leaving a positive review, assigning it to your classes, or sharing it with a colleague. Let me know what I can do to make this the best podcast resource for you. And if you'd like to know more about my writing coach services, then you can find my information in the podcast description and set up an appointment. I'll be back next week with another episode. But until then, keep healthy, keep writing, and don't let reviewer 2 get you down.